Praise the Lord, my dear friends. We are on the 12th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And today in the Gospel, taken from Matthew chapter 10, we see Jesus asking us not to fear. When we look into our lives, it's possible that we may be afraid of so many things. We may be afraid of certain individuals. We may be afraid of our own inabilities to perform our duties or responsibilities. We can be afraid of what's going to happen in the future. However, Jesus says that 2 sparrows can be bought for a penny, and not even one falls to the ground without the knowledge of our Heavenly Father. And each one of us are much more valuable than those sparrows. So there is no reason to fear. What is us today is that our fear will go only when we realize how valuable we are. In that context, when do we get unnecessarily frightened? When we do not realize or recognize how valuable each one of us are. When we look into Jesus' own life, we see that life for Jesus was not a bed of roses. He had to face a lot of criticism, a lot of struggles in life, and at the end we know he was arrested, scourged at the pillar, stripped naked, and was crucified. But he was not afraid. We see him in the Garden of Gethsemane asking the Heavenly Father to take that chalice away from him if it was the Father's will. But ultimately, he accepted the will of the Father. Was he not afraid? Or we need to ask, what was the reason for this courage that Jesus had? When we look at the Gospel according to St. John chapter 13 verse 3, we see Jesus getting ready to wash the feet of the disciples. And it's mentioned like this: Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things to his hands, and that he came from the Father and was going to the Father, got up from the table, took off his outer garments, and so on. There are 3 things that we need to pay attention. Here we see 3 convictions that Jesus had, which actually made him courageous in his life. Or because of these 3 convictions, we don't see Jesus as a person filled with fear. If we too can have these 3 convictions in our lives, we too will be able to come out of a lot of fear that we have. So let us see the second one in the list, that he knew that he came from the Father. When we say that we come from some place, what does it reveal? If I say I come from Kerala, it shows something about my identity. The place we come from is connected with our identity. And here, Jesus knowing that he came from the Father would mean Jesus was very sure of his identity as the Son of God. And once we are clear of our identity, it will determine the way we behave. What we do or what we decide not to do will depend on our awareness of our identity. And secondly, Jesus knew that he was going to the Father. The place where we go to is actually connected with the purpose for which we are going. If you are going to a movie theater, no one is going to ask whether you are going to pray rosary there. They will immediately know that you are going to watch a movie. Why? Because the place where we go to is connected with the purpose for which we are going. And so, another thing that Jesus was very certain in his life was the purpose of his life. And these two are also connected, identity and purpose. Once a person is very clear of his identity, his purpose will automatically be clear. If a person sees that he or she is wasting a lot of time without really knowing what exactly he or she is supposed to do during the day, then that person needs to ask himself or herself whether he or she knows his or her identity. It's only when we are clear of our identity our purpose in life will be clear. And the third thing that Jesus was very clear, that was mentioned first, that the Father had given all things into His hands. Jesus had that awareness that God the Father had given all the graces that is required for Him to fulfill the ministry that is entrusted to Him in His life. Once we are certain that God the Father has given all the graces that are required for us to complete the duties and responsibilities that are entrusted to us, then our fear will also vanish. But in order to have that conviction, it's important that we are clear of our identity and purpose. Unless and until we are clear of our identity and purpose, we will not be able to experience the presence of that grace in our life, which is enabling us to fulfill all the responsibilities that are related to our identity and purpose. And because of these three convictions that Jesus had, we see Him going through all the sufferings that came on His way. Many times in life, it's possible that we may not have the courage to stand for the values that Jesus stood for. The reason may be this, that we are not convinced of these three areas: our identity, purpose, and the awareness that God the Father will give us all the graces that are required for us to fulfill our ministry if we stand firm in our identity and purpose. And that is why in the Gospel again Jesus says that everyone who acknowledges Jesus before men, Jesus will also acknowledge Him before His Heavenly Father. Now, acknowledging Jesus or His values before men requires this courage. This courage will come from this awareness of these three elements. And that's the same courage that we see in Jeremiah in the first reading. Though many were plotting against him, many were trying to harm him physically, Jeremiah knew very well that the Lord is beside him. Because in Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 8, we see the Lord telling him, "Do not be afraid of them, because I will be with you to deliver you." And in the second reading taken from the letter of St. Paul to the Romans, we see that the grace of God and the free gift by the grace of God through Jesus abounded for many. When we are convinced of these three things, that will happen in our life too. We will notice that the grace of God abounds in the life of many people around us through us. May God bless each one of us.